Welcome to Moonlit Inc. BL. A BL story written under moonlight. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Scent of Cold Ashes. The air in the master suite was thick with the suffocating, artificial sweetness of high-end suppressants and expensive incense. It was a scent that didn't just linger, it clawed at the throat. Desmond Landry, or the man who now inhabited his skin, bolted upright. His lungs burned, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This isn't my room. In his previous life, he had died in a sterile hospital ward surrounded by the hum of machinery. Here, there was only the oppressive silence of a tomb. He looked down at his hands. They were pale, slender, and unmarred by the scars of a life lived. On his bedside table sat a silver-framed mirror. The face staring back was hauntingly beautiful, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of bruised violets. It was the face of a man who had never known a day of hunger, yet the expression was frozen in a permanent, haughty sneer. "Desmond Landry," he whispered. The voice was melodic but cold, vibrating with a secondary gender he had only ever read about in pulp fiction. He was an Omega. And if his memory served him, he was an Omega exactly 3 years away from being publicly executed by the very boy he was currently supposed to be disciplining. A sudden, muffled thud from beneath the floorboards jolted him. A memory, not his own, but the original Desmond's, flashed behind his eyes. A boy. A cellar. A key. The cellar, he gasped, his voice cracking. He didn't stop to put on a robe. He raced out of the room, his bare feet slapping against the cold marble of the hallway. The manor was vast and shadowed, every corner dripping with a luxury that felt predatory. He reached the heavy oak door at the end of the servants' wing and wrenched it open. The stairs leading down to the cellar were slick with dampness. As he descended, the scent of lavender, his own scent, turned sharp and metallic with his rising panic. At the bottom, in a corner where the light of his candle barely reached, sat a crate. And behind that crate was a shadow that trembled. "Colin?" Desmond called out. The shadow flinched violently. A pair of wide, dark eyes peered out from behind a curtain of matted hair. This was Colin Becker. At 15, he was already tall, but his frame was skeletal, his clothes little more than rags. The son of Avalon's greatest hero was being kept like a stray dog. "Don't, please," the boy rasped. His voice was a dry splinter. "I'll be quiet. I won't ask for the light again." The original Desmond had locked him here in the dark for 3 days because the boy's scent, still unmanifested but hinting at something powerful, had offended his delicate sensibilities. Desmond felt a wave of genuine nausea. He stepped forward, dropping the candle onto a nearby shelf and kneeling in the grime. "Colin, look at me." The boy didn't look. He curled tighter, shielding his head with his arms. He was waiting for the strike. He was waiting for the cold, lavender-scented cruelty that was the only thing he had known since his father's funeral. Instead, he felt something warm. Desmond reached out and pulled the boy into a clumsy, desperate embrace. The boy went rigid, his breath hitching in a way that sounded like a sob. Desmond's lavender scent, usually weaponized to assert dominance, began to shift. It softened, blooming into something herbal and grounding, the scent of a garden after a summer rain. "I'm sorry," Desmond whispered into the boy's hair, ignoring the dirt and the smell of neglect. "I'm so sorry, Colin. I'm taking you upstairs." You're going to kill me now?" Colin's voice was small, devoid of hope. Desmond pulled back just enough to look the boy in the eye. He reached out with a trembling hand and brushed a smudge of soot from Colin's cheek. "No," Desmond said, his violet eyes burning with a new, fierce clarity. "From now on, no one touches you. Not the council, not the shadows, and especially not me." He stood up, offering a hand to the boy who was destined to be his executioner. The prophecy said Desmond Landry would die by the sword of the hero's son. But as Colin tentatively reached out and wrapped his thin, cold fingers around Desmond's palm, the air in the cellar shifted. The script was tearing. The villain had left the stage, and in his place stood a man with nothing to lose and a child to save. Chapter 2, A Fragile Truce. The transition from the damp cellar to the gilded warmth of the master wing felt like crossing a border between two different worlds. Desmond carried the boy, who was surprisingly light for his height, past the rows of portraits of scowling Landry ancestors. As they reached the landing, a sharp gasp cut through the silence. "Master Desmond?" It was Mrs. Halloway, the head housekeeper. Her face, usually a mask of professional indifference, was contorted in genuine shock. Behind her, two younger maids stood frozen, their eyes darting from Desmond's bare, dirt-stained feet to the shivering bundle of rags in his arms. "Prepare the guest suite next to mine," Desmond commanded. His voice didn't shake, though his heart was hammering. "Bring hot water, clean linens, and the medicinal kit. Now." The guest suite, sir?" Mrs. Halloway stammered, her gaze landing on Colin's bruised face. "But the boy is meant for the—" "The boy has a name," Desmond interrupted, his violet eyes flashing with a coldness that felt foreign to his new soul but fit this body like a glove. "His name is Colin Becker. And if I hear him referred to as it, or the stray again, you will find your belongings on the curb by sunset." The air in the hallway turned heavy. Desmond's lavender scent spiked, not with the usual petulant irritation the staff expected, but with a dense, protective authority. The maids scurried away instantly, terrified of this new, sharp edge to their master. The bath and the truce. In the guest suite, the fire roared in the hearth. Desmond dismissed the servants, sensing Colin's primal fear at being touched by strangers. With awkward, careful movements, Desmond began to wash the grime from the boy's arms. Colin sat on the edge of the velvet bench, his body taut as a bowstring. He watched Desmond's every move, his dark eyes tracking the silver basin and the sponge as if they were weapons. "Why?" Colin whispered. The word was so quiet it was almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. Desmond paused, a damp cloth in his hand. "Why what, Colin? Yesterday, you told me I was a blight. You said my father's blood was tainted by failure." Colin looked up, and for a second, the shadow of the future Alpha, the man who would one day lead an army, flickered in his gaze. "You hated me yesterday. Why are you touching me like I'm something fragile today?" Desmond felt a pang of guilt that didn't belong to him, yet he carried it all the same. He couldn't tell the boy he was an interloper from another dimension. "I had a dream," Desmond said softly, leaning in. He pressed the warm cloth to Colin's scraped knee. "I saw a version of the future where the world was ash, and I was the one who lit the match. I didn't like the man I saw in that mirror." He looked Colin directly in the eye. "I can't change what I said yesterday. But I can change what I do today. You are the son of Christopher Becker. You are a guest in this house, not a prisoner." The first sign. As the warmth of the room soaked into Colin's skin, a strange thing happened. The boy's breathing hitched, and a faint, nearly imperceptible scent began to leak into the room. It was sharp, like crushed needles and mountain air. Pine. It was the first pre-manifestation scent. In the original book, this was the moment the villain, Desmond, had felt threatened by the boy's growing power and moved him to an unheated shack. Desmond felt the biological pull of it, the omega in him instinctively recognizing a future alpha. Instead of recoiling, he leaned forward and draped a heavy wool blanket around the boy's shoulders. "Rest," Desmond murmured. "The door won't be locked tonight. I'll be in the room next door." As he turned to leave, a small, dirty hand shot out and snagged the silk of his sleeve. Colin didn't say anything, but his grip was desperate. Desmond reached back and placed his hand over Colin's. For the first time, the lavender and the faint pine mingled in the air, creating a harmony that shouldn't have existed in this tragedy. "I'm not going anywhere," Desmond promised. Outside the door, he found Mrs. Halloway waiting in the shadows, her expression unreadable. "The boys sent, sir, it's starting. If the council finds out you're harboring a manifesting alpha without a leash, then let them come," Desmond snapped, though a cold shiver walked down his spine. "I'll handle the council. You just make sure he's fed." Desmond retreated to his own room, collapsing against the door. He had survived the first day, but the scent of pine was a ticking clock. Colin was growing, and the world outside was already sharpening its knives. Chapter 3: The Sandalwood Shadow. The third day was the hardest. The manor had begun to settle into a tense, fragile domesticity until the front gates groaned open, and the heavy, suffocating scent of sandalwood began to seep through the vents. Desmond was in the library, teaching a wide-eyed Colin how to read military maps, a skill the original Desmond would have burned the boy's hands for even attempting, when the heavy double doors were flung open without a knock. My, Desmond. You've certainly turned this drafty old tomb into a nursery, haven't you?" The voice was like silk sliding over a blade. Leon Gray stood in the doorway, draped in furs that cost more than a commoner earned in a decade. At 32, the senior Omega was the epitome of refined malice. He didn't just walk into a room, he colonized it. Colin flinched, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he tried to scramble back into the shadows. The scent of pine spiked, sour and sharp with fear. Desmond felt his stomach drop. If Leon smelled that manifesting alpha scent on the boy, he would report it to the council, and Colin would be dragged away to a re-education camp by noon. "Leon," Desmond said, his voice dropping an octave into a bored, aristocratic drawl. He didn't stand. He didn't even look up from the map. "I don't recall inviting a stray cat into my parlor today." Leon's eyes narrowed, his sandalwood scent thickening, turning aggressive and cloying. He sauntered toward the desk, his gaze locking onto Colin like a hawk. "And I don't recall you having a heart, Desmond. Word at the opera house is that you've gone soft. That you're coddling the Becker brat instead of breaking him, as we discussed." Leon reached out a gloved hand to tilt Colin's chin up. Desmond's blood turned to ice. "Act. You have to act. Get your hands off my property, Leon," Desmond snapped. He stood up abruptly, knocking a glass of wine over. The red liquid bled across the maps, staining the paper like an omen. Desmond stepped between them, shoving Colin roughly toward the corner. It hurt to see the betrayal flash in the boy's eyes, but Desmond didn't blink. "Property?" Leon purred, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "He looks remarkably well-fed for property. And what is that smell? Is the little hero finally growing his teeth?" Leon leaned in, sniffing the air like a predator. Desmond laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that felt like glass in his throat. "It's the smell of a kennel, Leon. The boy is a project. Nothing more. I'm simply keeping him healthy so he lasts longer when I decide to break him properly. A broken toy is no fun if it falls apart in the first hour, is it?" He turned to Colin, his face a mask of cold, violet-eyed indifference. "Get out, boy. You've tracked mud onto the rug. Go to the kitchens and scrub the floors until your fingers bleed. If I see your face before dinner, I'll have you locked back in the dark." Colin stared at him, his chest heaving. The trust they had built over the last 48 hours shattered visibly. The boy's scent turned cold, like frost on a grave. Without a word, Colin turned and bolted from the room. The silence that followed was heavy. "There he is," Leon chuckled, tapping his cane against the floor. "The Desmond Landry I know and loathe. I was worried for a moment that you'd developed a conscience. That would be inconvenient for our plans for the council." "Conscience is for alphas and martyrs, Leon," Desmond said, his heart hammering so hard he was sure the other man could see it through his silk shirt. "I am neither. Now, unless you've come to offer me something more interesting than gossip, get out of my house." The scent of sandalwood makes me sneeze. Leon lingered for a moment, his eyes searching Desmond's face for a crack in the porcelain. Finally, he bowed with mocking grace. Keep your pet on a short leash, Desmond. The council is watching. If he manifests as an alpha, he belongs to the state. And if you've hidden that from us. Leon didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. When the front doors finally slammed shut and the sandalwood faded, Desmond collapsed into his chair. His hands were shaking so violently he had to tuck them into his sleeves. He ran to the kitchens, his heart in his throat. He found Colin in the scullery, on his knees, scrubbing the stone floor with a brush. The boy didn't look up when Desmond entered. "Colin," Desmond whispered, reaching out. The boy flinched away, the brush clattering to the floor. "Don't," Colin said, his voice trembling with a new, dangerous edge. "I heard you. I'm just a toy. I'm just property." "I had to say it," Desmond said, his voice breaking. "He would have taken you, Colin. He would have killed you." Colin finally looked up. His eyes weren't full of tears, they were full of a cold, budding fire. The pine scent was no longer just fear. It was a challenge. "Maybe," Colin said. "But at least he doesn't pretend to be my friend before he kicks me." Desmond realized then that saving the boy's life was easy. Saving the boy's heart was going to be the real war. Chapter 4, The First Manifestation. 6 months had passed since Leon Gray's visit, and the manor had become a fortress of secrets. Desmond had spent those months walking a razor's edge. In public, he remained the haughty, distant Landry heir. In private, he was a man obsessed, smuggling military texts to Colin and ensuring the boy ate double portions of protein to fill out his burgeoning frame. But tonight, the air in the manor didn't just smell like autumn, it smelled like a storm was breaking inside the walls. "Master Desmond, please," Mrs. Halloway whispered, her face ashen as she met him in the corridor. "The boy, he's locked himself in the library. The scent, it's leaking into the street. If the night watch passes by." Desmond didn't wait for her to finish. He ran. The smell hit him before he even reached the library doors. It was no longer the soft scent of rain on needles. It was pine, crushed, sharp, and electric, surging with the raw, aggressive heat of a true alpha manifestation. It was the scent of a predator claiming its territory. Desmond threw open the heavy oak doors and was nearly knocked back by the sheer atmospheric pressure of the room. Colin was on the floor, his fingers digging grooves into the mahogany desk. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his muscles roiling as his body restructured itself in the agonizing crucible of maturity. He was no longer a child, he was a force of nature. "Colin!" Desmond gasped, slamming the doors behind him and bolting the lock. "Get out!" Colin groaned, his voice dropping into a guttural, primal register. His eyes, usually a soft brown, were bleeding into a molten gold. "Desmond, run. I can't. I don't want to hurt you." The boy's alpha instincts were screaming, sensing an omega in his space. In his fevered state, the lines between guardian and mate were blurring into a chaotic, biological static. Suddenly, a heavy rhythmic thud echoed from the front of the manor. Clang! 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 "Open in the name of the Avalon Guard," a voice boomed from the street. "We have reports of an unregistered alpha surge." Desmond froze. If they broke down the door and found Colin like this, unbound, unsuppressed, and powerful, they would collar him like an animal. Or worse, they would execute him on the spot as a threat to the state. "Colin, look at me," Desmond commanded, dropping to his knees. The boy lunged, not to attack, but driven by a desperate, maddened need for grounding. He grabbed Desmond's shoulders, his grip bruising. The scent of pine grew suffocating, threatening to trigger a distress response in Desmond's own body. "I have to drown him out," Desmond thought. "I have to be the shield." Desmond closed his eyes and did something the original Desmond would have considered a supreme humiliation. He reached deep into his core and forced his own pheromones to flare. He didn't just let his scent drift, he projected it. Lavender. Not the sharp, soapy scent of the past, but a thick, narcotic bloom of wild purple fields under a hot sun. It was heavy, sweet, and cooling. It surged out of him in waves, wrapping around the jagged edges of Colin's alpha heat like a soft velvet shroud. "Breathe, Colin," Desmond whispered, pulling the boy's head onto his shoulder. "Focus on me. Just the lavender. Nothing else." Outside, the guards were shouting. "The scent is coming from the upper floor. Break the hinges." Desmond gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of his energy into the pheromonal mask. He had to create a scent lock, a phenomenon where a high-level omega's scent completely encapsulates an alpha's, making it invisible to outsiders. It felt like his very soul was being drained. His vision blurred, and his heart raced as his omega biology reacted to the proximity of such a powerful alpha. "Just a little longer," he pleaded silently. The library doors rattled as the guards moved through the house. Desmond heard Mrs. Halloway's voice, trembling but sharp. "Gentlemen, really? My master is in the midst of a private heat. Surely you wouldn't dare intrude on an omega's dignity?" "An omega?" a guard grumbled. The censor picked up pine. "I assure you," Mrs. Halloway lied through her teeth, "it is merely a high-potency lavender suppressant. My master's humors are particularly volatile tonight." Desmond felt Colin's body finally go limp against him. The golden fire in the boy's eyes faded as the lavender forced his nervous system to reset. The surge died down to a simmer. The footsteps outside the door lingered, then finally retreated. "False alarm," the guard muttered. "Check the next block. That damn Landry brat always did have a sickeningly strong scent." As the house fell silent, Desmond let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a lifetime. He slumped against the desk, still holding the sleeping, newly minted alpha in his arms. Colin's head rested against Desmond's chest. In his sleep, the boy's hand drifted up, clutching the fabric of Desmond's shirt. "You're safe," Desmond whispered, his voice trembling with exhaustion. He looked at the boy, the man he was raising. "You're an alpha, Colin. God help us both." The dark demise hadn't caught up to him tonight. But as Desmond felt the heat of Colin's new strength, he realized the villain wasn't just hiding a hero anymore. He was harboring a king. Chapter 5, The Academy and the Accusation. The separation felt like a physical wound. For months, the manor had been a cocoon. Now, the world was ripping it open. Colin stood at the carriage door, dressed in the charcoal-gray cadet uniform of the Avalon Military Academy. He was 16, but the manifestation had carved his jaw into granite and added 3 inches to his height. The scent of pine was no longer a wild storm, it was a controlled, cool forest, humming with the restrained power of a true alpha. "I don't want to leave you here," Colin said, his voice dropping into that new, resonant bass. His hand lingered on the carriage frame, his eyes searching Desmond's face with an intensity that made the older Omega's heart skip. "Leon is still circling. The council is looking for a reason to strike." Desmond reached out, straightening Colin's silver lapel pins. His own lavender scent was thin and weary, but he forced a smile. "They can't strike what they can't catch, Colin. Go. Be the soldier your father was. Reclaim the Becker name so that one day, no one can tell you who you're allowed to protect." Colin grabbed Desmond's hand, pressing his thumb against the pulse point of Desmond's wrist, an alpha's silent mark of claim. "I'll be back. I'll be back for you." As the carriage rolled away, Desmond felt the cold air of the city rush in to fill the void. He didn't have time to mourn. He had a trial to attend. The High Council chamber was a semicircular theater of cold white marble. At the center sat the 12 elders, and to the right, looking like a vulture in silk, was Leon Gray. Desmond walked to the center of the floor, his chin tilted at a haughty angle. He wore a high-collared coat of deep violet, looking every bit the arrogant villain the world expected. Desmond Landry, the lead elder, intoned, his voice echoing. "You stand accused of strategic grooming. Leon Gray asserts that you have intentionally harbored a high-level alpha, the son of a traitor, without the mandated state dampeners, effectively raising a private weapon." Leon stood, his sandalwood scent oily and suffocating. "Let us be honest, elders. Desmond has always been volatile. But to take the son of Christopher Becker, a boy whose father's heroism was nothing more than a failed coup, and raise him in secret? It smells of treason." Leon walked toward Desmond, circling him. "Tell us, Desmond. Why did the censors detect a true alpha surge at your manor 6 months ago? Why is the boy suddenly enrolled in the academy under your personal sponsorship? Are you building a hero, or a puppet to tear down this council?" Desmond felt the eyes of the 12 elders boring into him. In the original script, this was where the villain would have crumbled, lashing out with insults that sealed his execution. Instead, Desmond laughed. It was a hollow, mocking sound. "A puppet, Leon? You flatter my ambition," Desmond said, his voice echoing with practiced disdain. He turned to the elders. "I took the boy because the Landry name was losing its luster. I wanted a Becker as my footman. I wanted the hero's son to carry my bags and polish my boots. It was a matter of vanity, nothing more." "Then why sponsor his education?" an elder demanded. "Because a stupid footman is useless," Desmond snapped, his lavender scent turning sharp and acidic, mimicking his old, bratty persona. "If he is to serve the Landry house, he must be elite. I am not raising a weapon for a coup, I am raising a servant worthy of my status. Is it a crime now for an omega of my standing to demand the best?" Leon's eyes flared. He didn't believe a word of it, but Desmond was using the council's own prejudice against them. They expected an omega to be vain, petty, and obsessed with status. By acting like a spoiled brat, he was hiding his true heresy, love. "The boy is a Becker," Leon hissed. "His blood is dangerous." "His blood belongs to me," Desmond countered, stepping into Leon's space, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have the custody papers signed by the late hero himself. Unless you wish to challenge the sanctity of a dying alpha's will, I suggest you sit down, Leon. You're starting to smell like desperate desperation." The council deliberated for an hour that felt like a century. When they returned, the lead elder struck the gavel. "The guardianship remains." However, the elder looked at Desmond with cold calculation. Should Cadet Colin Becker show even a hint of insubordination at the academy, the guardian, Desmond Landry, will be held personally responsible. His life for the boy's conduct. Desmond bowed, his face a mask of stone. "Of course. I expect nothing less." As he exited the hall, Leon caught him by the sleeve in the shadow of the marble pillars. The sandalwood scent was no longer elegant, it was rancid. "You think you've won, little bird?" Leon whispered. "You've just tied a noose around your neck. The moment that boy realizes what you are, what you've done to keep him, he will be the one to kick the chair from under you." Desmond pulled his arm away, his violet eyes cold. "Then I'll die with a better view than you'll ever have, Leon." He walked out into the cold Avalon rain. He had bought Colin time. He had traded his safety for the boy's future. The dark demise was no longer a prophecy, it was a contract he had just signed in blood. Chapter 6, The Trial of the Traitor Omega. The grand ballroom of the Avalon Palace was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp military dress, but for Desmond Landry, it was a blurred kaleidoscope of nausea and noise. A year had passed. A year of Desmond secretly weaving his own pheromones into every letter he sent to the academy, a year of scent-locking the manor so that the council censors only ever picked up his own volatile omega signature instead of the skyrocketing power of the boy he was hiding. The cost was written in the hollows of his cheeks. Desmond stood near a fluted marble pillar, his lavender scent faint, smelling more like dried petals in a dusty book than a living garden. His skin was translucent, his violet eyes shadowed by a fatigue that sleep couldn't touch. "He's here," someone whispered. The brass doors swung open, and the room went silent. Colin Becker didn't walk into the room, he commanded it. At 17, he wore the gold-braided uniform of a first-class cadet, his chest decorated with marks of tactical excellence. But it was his presence that stopped hearts. The scent of pine was a silent roar, dense, ancient, and undeniably dominant. He looked like the hero his father had been, but with a predatory edge that Christopher Becker had never possessed. Colin's eyes scanned the room, ignoring the fluttering fans of omegas and the calculating stares of alphas. They landed on Desmond. In an instant, the decorated soldier vanished, replaced by the boy from the cellar. Colin crossed the ballroom in strides that bordered on a run. "Desmond," Colin breathed, stopping inches from him. The sheer heat radiating from the young alpha made Desmond's knees buckle. "You look spectacular, Colin," Desmond managed, his voice a thin silver thread. He reached out to touch Colin's new medals, but his hand trembled so violently he had to pull it back into his sleeve. Colin didn't let him. He lunged forward, catching Desmond's wrist. His golden eyes flared, shifting from warmth to a terrifying, protective rage. "Your pulse," Colin hissed, his voice vibrating with alpha authority. "It's thready. And your scent, why is it so thin? What has Leon done to you while I was away?" "Nothing, Colin. The gala is just loud," Desmond lied, but a sudden wave of vertigo sent him swaying. Colin's arm went around Desmond's waist, hauling him flush against his chest. The contact was electric. For Desmond, the proximity to a true alpha's unfiltered scent should have been a relief, but his overtaxed system reacted like a circuit board being fried. "You're cold," Colin growled. He leaned down, his nose brushing the scent gland at Desmond's neck. He inhaled sharply, and his entire body went rigid. "Lavender, and pine? Why do you smell like me, Desmond?" Desmond gasped, trying to push away. "Colin, not here. The council is watching." "I don't care about the council." Colin's voice boomed, causing several nearby nobles to flinch. He realized it then, the faint, shimmering veil of Desmond's pheromones that had been artificially wrapped around his own soul for a year. The scent lock. It was a biological suicide mission. Desmond had been using his own life force to mask Colin's true alpha signature from the state's detectors. Every day Colin had spent thriving at the academy, Desmond had been withering to keep the shroud intact. "You've been bleeding for me," Colin whispered, his voice cracking. "Every time I felt calm at the academy, it wasn't me. It was you. You've been feeding me your own strength." "I told you," Desmond said, his eyes fluttering shut as he leaned into the alpha's warmth. "No one touches you. Not even the law." Across the room, Leon Gray watched them, a glass of dark wine in his hand and a predatory smirk on his face. He began to walk toward them, his sandalwood scent sharpening like a whetstone. "Cadet Becker," Leon purred. "A marvelous homecoming. But your guardian looks peaked. Perhaps we should call the state physicians to examine his fragile humors?" Colin turned, shielding Desmond's limp body with his own. He didn't use words. He simply let his scent flare. The pine turned into a suffocating, mountaintop blizzard. It was so powerful that Leon actually stumbled back, his wine spilling over his white gloves. "Stay back, Leon," Colin warned, his voice a low, vibrating snarl that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "If you take one more step toward him, I will forget my uniform and remember exactly whose son I am." For the first time, Leon Gray looked truly afraid. Desmond felt himself being swept up into Colin's arms. The villain was being carried out of his own stage play, tucked against the heart of the boy he had saved. As the world faded into darkness, Desmond's last thought wasn't of his demise, it was of the scent of pine, finally strong enough to carry them both. Chapter 7, The Hero's Ghost. The manor was silent, save for the rhythmic, shallow breathing of Desmond in the next room. He was sedated, his body finally collapsing under the weight of a year's worth of biological shielding. Colin sat in the dim light of the library, the very room where he had once cowered in the shadows. On the desk sat a heavy, iron-bound chest. Desmond had given him the key before losing consciousness, his fingers cold as ice. "Read them," Desmond had whispered. "Before they tell you their version of the truth." Inside were the journals of Christopher Becker. Colin's fingers trembled as he turned the vellum pages. He expected tales of glory, of the great Alpha defending Avalon's borders. Instead, he found a chronicle of a trap. March 14th. The Council demands I lead the charge into the dead zone. They know the atmospheric sensors are failing. They want the Becker line ended. Leon Gray smiles as he signs the order. He thinks I don't see the sandalwood on his bribe money. Colin's grip tightened, the paper crinkling. His father hadn't died a hero, he had been sent to a slaughterhouse by the men who now stood on the High Council. But it was the final entry, dated the night of the funeral, that stopped Colin's heart. It wasn't in his father's handwriting. It was a formal, stamped decree from the High Council, tucked into the back cover. Exhibit 45B, Contingency of the Landry Guardianship. In the event that the Becker Alpha manifests, the Guardian, Desmond Landry, shall serve as a biological dampener. Upon the ward's completion of military training, the Guardian's scentlock shall be deemed an act of high treason for masking a state asset. Execution of the Guardian is pre-authorized for the night of the Red Moon to ensure the ward's total transition to state control. Colin felt a roar beginning in his chest. It wasn't just a prophecy. It was a schedule. The Council hadn't allowed Desmond to take him out of mercy. They had used Desmond as a battery to keep Colin stable, intending to discard the villainous Omega the moment the heroic Alpha was ready to be weaponized. Desmond knew. He had known since the first day in the cellar. Every meal he gave Colin, every map he taught him, every drop of lavender he bled into the air, he was knowingly walking toward a scaffold he had built himself. "You knew," Colin whispered, the pine scent in the room turning jagged and lethal. "You weren't changing fate. You were buying it for me." The door to the library creaked open. Desmond stood there, leaning heavily against the frame. He was wearing a thin white silk robe, his hair a messy halo of pale strands. He looked like a ghost already. "The journals, they don't lie, Colin," Desmond said, his voice a ghost of its former arrogance. "Your father was a better man than this city deserved. And I am exactly what the script requires." Colin was across the room in a blur of motion. He didn't strike, he gathered Desmond into a crushing, desperate embrace, pinning the smaller man against the doorframe. The scent of pine exploded, fierce and possessive, demanding that the lavender respond. "The script is garbage," Colin snarled into Desmond's neck. "They think they can execute you? They think they can take the man who fed me when I was starving and call him a traitor? The Council has the army, Colin," Desmond murmured, his strength failing as he slumped into the Alpha's heat. "They have Leon. They have the law." "I don't care about the law," Colin said, his golden eyes glowing with a terrifying, ancient light. He pulled back, cupping Desmond's pale face in his large, calloused hands. "They spent a year waiting for me to become a hero. They should have been more careful. Because a hero saves the city." Colin leaned down, his forehead pressing against Desmond's. "But a Becker burns the city down to save what's his. Let the Red Moon come, Desmond. I'm not the boy in the cellar anymore." In that moment, the lavender and pine didn't just mingle. They fused. The villain and the hero were gone. There was only a protector and the man he refused to lose. Chapter 8, The Night of the Red Moon. The sky over Avalon was the color of a fresh bruise, split by the eerie, blood-red glow of the lunar eclipse. In the central plaza, the iron scaffold stood like a jagged tooth against the horizon. Desmond Landry knelt at its center, his hands bound in cold, suppressant-laced steel. He was dressed in a simple white tunic, the traditional garb of the condemned. His lavender scent was nearly extinguished, smothered by the heavy, medicinal dampeners the council had forced down his throat. High above on the balcony of the citadel, Leon Gray stood draped in ceremonial robes. The scent of sandalwood was thick and rancid, a cloying cloud of victory. Citizens of Avalon. Leon's voice was amplified by the stone acoustics of the plaza. Tonight, we purge the rot. Desmond Landry, the serpent who whispered treason in the ear of our future hero, shall meet the fate he scripted for himself. Desmond looked out into the crowd. He didn't see the citizens. He saw the black-clad guards of Leon's private militia, their bayonets gleaming. He felt the dark demise closing in, the cold breath of the prophecy at his neck. I did it, Desmond thought, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. Colin is safe at the barracks. He's away from this. Executioner. Leon roared, raising a hand. Begin the tally. The heavy blade of the guillotine groaned as it was winched to the top of the frame. Then, the wind changed. A low, vibrating hum began to rattle the windowpanes of the surrounding buildings. It wasn't thunder. It was the synchronized boots of a legion. From the eastern gate, a flare of brilliant, silver light cut through the red gloom. Crack. The stone gate of the plaza didn't just open, it was detonated. Through the smoke, a silhouette emerged that made the council elders fall back in their seats. Colin Becker rode at the head of the 1st Cadet Division, but he wasn't wearing his student colors. He wore his father's old, midnight blue cloak, and his eyes were twin suns of molten gold. The scent of pine swept over the plaza like a mountain avalanche, snuffing out the sandalwood, the dampeners, and the fear. It was the scent of a king coming to claim a ruined throne. The council is deposed. Colin's voice didn't need amplification, it carried the raw power of a true alpha. Every man who stands between me and that scaffold is a traitor to the Becker name. Fire. Leon screamed, his face contorting. Kill the boy. Kill the prisoner. The militia raised their rifles, but they were too slow. Colin leaped from his horse, a blur of movement. He didn't use a sword, he used the sheer pressure of his aura. Alphas in the crowd collapsed to their knees, their biology demanding they submit to the sheer dominance of the pine. Colin reached the scaffold in 3 strides. He tore through the guards like they were made of paper, his hands finding the iron chains of the guillotine's winch. With a roar of effort, he wrenched the mechanism from the wood, the metal snapping with a sound like a bone breaking. He dropped to his knees beside Desmond, his large hands trembling as he ripped the suppressant collar from Desmond's neck. I told you, Colin hissed, his voice thick with a terrifying, protective love. I am not the boy in the cellar. Colin, the army, you'll be an outlaw, Desmond gasped, his lavender scent finally beginning to flicker back to life as the collar's grip vanished. I'm not an outlaw, Colin said, standing up and pulling Desmond to his feet, shielding him with his cloak. He turned to the crowd, to the soldiers who had stopped fighting, and to the terrified elders on the balcony. I am the son of the man you murdered, Colin declared, his voice ringing through the crimson night. And this Omega is the only soul in this city who didn't let my name die in the dark. If you want his life, you have to take mine first. The silence was absolute. Then, one by one, the soldiers of the Avalon Guard lowered their weapons. They didn't look at Leon Gray, they looked at the boy who smelled of the high forests and the man who had raised him. Leon realized his coup had failed in the face of a superior predator. He turned to flee into the shadows of the citadel, but he was blocked by the very cadets he had dismissed as children. The red moon reached its peak, casting a halo around the 2 figures on the scaffold. The prophecy of the Omega villain's death was hovering in the air, but the blade had fallen on the wrong man's neck. "We're leaving, Desmond," Colin whispered, his grip on Desmond's waist unbreakable. "The city can burn. We're going home." Chapter 9, Rewriting the Prophecy. The smoke of Avalon was a smudge on the distant horizon, a memory of a life lived in shadows and silk. 3 months had passed since the night of the red moon. The High Council had been dismantled, Leon Grey had fled into a bitter exile, and the villainous House of Landry had been scrubbed from the ledgers of the capital. To the world, Desmond Landry was a casualty of the revolution. To the man standing in a sun-drenched meadow, he was finally just Desmond. The cottage sat nestled in a valley where the air was sweet and thin. Here, there were no marble floors to stain with blood or wine, only wide-planked wood and the scent of drying herbs hanging from the rafters. Desmond stood on the porch, a thick-knit cardigan pulled over his shoulders. His health had returned, the color in his cheeks a soft, healthy pink. His lavender scent had changed, it no longer carried the sharp, defensive spike of a cornered animal. It was mellow and deep, like a field at dusk. A sudden, heavy warmth pressed against his back. 2 strong arms wrapped around his waist, and the scent of pine, cool, steady, and utterly devoted, enveloped him. "The tea is getting cold," Colin murmured, his voice a low rumble against Desmond's ear. Colin was 18 now, his frame broader, his presence that of a man who had looked at a throne and walked away from it without a second glance. He had traded his medals for a linen shirt and the calluses of a gardener. "I was just looking at the road," Desmond said, leaning his head back against Colin's shoulder. "Waiting for a script to arrive. For a messenger to tell me I've missed my cue for a tragic ending." Colin tightened his grip, his nose brushing the sensitive skin of Desmond's neck. "There is no messenger, Desmond. I burned the script. We're off the map now." They moved inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth. The interior of the cottage was a testament to their new life. Military strategy books sat side by side with botanical guides. On the mantel stood a single, framed charcoal sketch, not of a hero or a villain, but of 2 people sitting in a library, sharing a single candle. Desmond sat in the armchair by the fire, and Colin sat on the floor at his feet, resting his head on Desmond's knee. It was a reversal of their first days in the manor, a quiet equilibrium they had fought through fire to earn. "Do you ever regret it?" Desmond asked softly, his fingers drifting through Colin's dark hair. "You could have been the High General. You could have been the King of Avalon." Colin looked up, his golden eyes clear and fierce. "I am exactly where I chose to be. I was a boy dying in a cellar, and you gave me the world. Why would I want a crown when I have the man who taught me how to breathe?" Desmond felt a tear prick at his eye, not one of grief, but of a profound, soul-deep relief. The villain he had transmigrated into was dead. The hero Colin was supposed to become had been rewritten into a man who chose love over legacy. The prophecy had failed. The dark demise had been traded for a quiet sunrise. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long, golden shadows across the valley, the scent of lavender and pine drifted out the open window. It wasn't a story of a hero or a villain anymore. It was just a story of 2 people who had survived the dark, finding peace in the silence of a world that finally let them be. Desmond closed his eyes, his hand resting over Colin's heart. For the first time in 2 lives, he wasn't waiting for the end. He was waiting for tomorrow. The end. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the story as much as I enjoyed making it. Please do like and subscribe to help the channel grow.